Looks like we're already reading some more evidence into the record here.
AKA Mickey Keenan, a 33-year-old, died as a direct result of blunt force trauma to the right side of the skull. Autopsy results indicate the cause of injury was consistent with a baseball or softball bat. No other injuries, medical conditions, or post-attack treatment contributed to Robinson's death. With that, we call Detective John Defoe.
All right, come around, sir.
And while Detective Defoe takes the stand, may we set up an enlargement and a demonstration?
Is there any objection?
Not at this time, Your Honor, though I do ask that I'm allowed to move when opposing counsel uses the demonstrator.
That's perfectly fine.
Afternoon, Your Honor.
Good afternoon.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Could you please state your name for the record?
Sure. I'm John Defoe.
What do you do for a living?
I'm a forensic investigator with the Midlands Department of Criminal Investigations.
How long have you been working there?
It's been about 4 years now.
What kind of educational background do you have?
Completed my undergraduate work in physics, and then I got my master's in forensic science. I actually teach courses at Midland State University as well.
Well, Detective, what was your role in the investigation of the defendant, Skylar Sinclair?
It was my job to analyze the blood evidence in this case to determine there was a link between Mr. Sinclair and the scene of Officer Robinson's death.
What kinds of evidence did you collect?
3 types. Evidence from the dock near where we found Officer Robinson's body, evidence from a bat that we recovered near that scene, and evidence from a ski mask we located near Miss Sinclair's apartment.
What kinds of tests did you perform on that evidence?
We performed blood spatter analysis, as well as blood DNA identification.
Well, what kind of experience do you have with those tests?
Oh, I've performed both of those tests hundreds of times. I actually include them in one of my lectures at Midland State.
How reliable are they?
Very. We calibrate all of our machines before we perform each and every one of our forensic tests.
Were all of your conclusions formed to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty?
They were, of course.
Let's talk about the items that you collected.
All right.
Your Honor, I'm approaching opposing counsel with what have been marked for identification as Exhibits 1, 4, and 11. The bat and the bat. I'm handing Detective Defoe the same.
Thank you, ma'am.
Your Honor, here are copies of Exhibits 4 and 11. Detective Defoe has Exhibit 1. It's a piece of physical evidence.
All right.
Detective, do you recognize what I've just handed you?
I do. Exhibit 11 is a map of the Midlands Marina, where we found Officer Robinson's body. Exhibit 4 is a photograph of the bat that we collected at the scene. And then Exhibit 1 is that ski mask that we found near Miss Sinclair's apartment.
Your Honor, we offer all 3 of those exhibits. For the map, Exhibit 11, both parties have stipulated it's an accurate representation of that area. And for the photo of the bat and the ski mask, both parties have stipulated to the chain of custody.
Any objection from the defense?
No objections, Your Honor.
They're admitted.
So, Detective, where'd you start?
That was at the docks at the Midlands Marina. I actually brought along a larger version of this map to help explain.
Your Honor, may Detective Defoe step down to use that enlargement?
Certainly.
So could you tell us where you collected blood evidence on that dock?
Of course. At this point marked A, we found 2 distinct blood patterns. The first was entirely consistent with the blunt force trauma wound, which was confirmed by Officer Robinson's autopsy. But The second of those patterns looked a lot more like something we call cast-off.
What's cast off?
Cast-off occurs when an object swung in an arc flings blood onto nearby surfaces. By counting the number of those arcs, we can determine how many swings there were of a weapon at the scene of a homicide.
Detective, could you tell the jury how that works?
Sure. Let me actually show you. Imagine that this paintbrush right here is a weapon, and that this cup of water right here represents a wound. The first time I swing this weapon, I haven't inflicted the wound yet. So you don't see any cast-off on the nearby surfaces.
When do you see cast off?
Well, when an object draws blood, some of that blood transfers onto the weapon. So then when that weapon is brought back and then swung again, the pattern that's left on the surrounding surfaces is called cast-off. As you can see, it was only after that second swing that the cast-off pattern was created.
Well, Detective, what can that pattern tell us?
Well, the cast-off pattern that I made here is created out of water, so it's going to evaporate. When we find cast-off that's in the form of blood, the scene of a homicide, we can count the number of those arc patterns to determine how many times an object with blood on it was swung.
Sir, what'd you find on that dock in this case?
Well, at this point, marked A, aside from all the other blood, we found a single, distinct arc of cast-off. This indicated that after a weapon inflicted a wound, it was brought back and swung again.
What was your next step?
Well, at this point marked C in the woods, just off the path that leads from the docks up to a convenience store marked D, we found that bat I mentioned earlier lying in some brush.
What kind of condition was that bat in?
There were 2 blood stains on that bat. There was a larger blood stain at the barrel, approximately 4 by 6 inches, and a smaller blood stain down at the handle, roughly ½ a centimeter in diameter.
And how about that mask that you mentioned earlier?
We actually found that ski mask roughly 45 minutes away from the marina. We found it in a garbage bag that had been sealed shut and left in a dumpster behind Miss Sinclair's apartment.
So what'd you do with that evidence?
Well, we took blood samples from those 3 locations, the dog, the bat, and the mask, and compared them to DNA samples we obtained from Officer Robinson during his autopsy and Miss Sinclair during her arrest.
Sir, could you tell us how you did that?
Sure. We use something called a polymerase chain reaction, or a PCR test.
What's a PCR test?
It's basically just a chemical reaction that allows us to take 2 different DNA samples, compare them to one another to see if they match.
How does it do that?
Think of it like a zipper. You're probably familiar with the double helix or twisting ladder shape that we use to show what DNA looks like. A PCR test allows us to unzip the 2 sides of that ladder and compare 2 different DNA samples to one another. If the 2 sides of 2 different samples zip back up, we have a match.
What'd you find when you compared the blood you collected from the dock with those samples you collected?
The blood on that dock was entirely consistent with the blood DNA profile of Officer Jamie Robinson. So let me show you.
What about the bat?
Like I mentioned earlier, we found 2 distinct blood stains on that bat. The larger blood stain on the barrel was identical to Officer Robinson's DNA. But the smaller blood stain that we found down on the handle was entirely consistent with the DNA profile of Miss Skylar Sinclair.
And how about that mask?
That was just the same as the Batman. Once again, we found 2 matches to Officer Jamie Robinson and Skylar Sinclair.
Detective, could you tell us whether you ever compared any of those samples to samples you collected from someone named Alex Everett?
I did, ma'am. I ran that same PCR test on the dog, bat, and mask to a DNA sample we obtained from Miss Alex Everett.
What'd you find?
None of those 3 locations matched the DNA profile of Alex Everett. The only 2 people's DNA that we found were Officer Jamie Robinson and Skylar Sinclair.
Thank you, Detective. You can retake your seat. No further questions.
Cross?
Yes, Your Honor.
Would opposing counsel like me to leave these up or take them down?
You can leave it up. Thank you very much, Ms.
Of course.
Maloney. Do you mind if I retrieve State's Exhibit, I believe 4? It's the mask.
The mask is with Detective Defoe.
Thank you very much.
There you are.
Good afternoon, sir.
Afternoon.
You talked a lot about a softball bat on direct examination, right?
I did.
Have you played softball, sir?
I've played baseball. I actually am helping coach my 8-year-old son's Little League team this season.
So, sir, you know that some people bat right-handed and some people bat left-handed, right?
They do.
I want to talk about what your evidence is most consistent with. You talked a lot about this ski mask on direct examination, said you found the victim's blood on it, right?
That's true.
In fact, what you found was a large blood stain of the victim,
We did, yes.
but it wasn't dispersed evenly across the mask, was it?
Well, that's right, sir. If you were wearing the mask, the blood stain was primarily focused on the left side of it.
Exactly. You actually didn't find any blood at all on the right side of this ski mask, did you?
That's right, it was on the left side.
Just on the left side.
Correct.
Sir, let's talk about what batting stance that's most consistent with.
All right.
Imagine I'm standing like this. You'd agree with me. In this left-handed stance, the right side of my face is more exposed, right?
It would be if you're angling your head just so.
And the left side of my face is actually less exposed in this left-handed batting stance.
If you're holding your head just like that.
But that's not what you found, right? You found blood on the left side, not the right side.
I'm not sure what you mean, sir.
Well, sir, let me ask you this. If I had a right-handed batting stance, like this, then you'd agree the left side of my face is more exposed, right?
Well, it would be more exposed, sir, but that doesn't necessarily tell us anything about which direction the blood spatter would go.
The right side of my face is tucked inward, wouldn't you agree?
Well, the way you're holding your head right now, it is.
And just like you said on direct examination, you didn't find any blood on the right side, only on the left, right?
Yes, sir. But like I said, it depends entirely on what's happening there. It can happen either way, depending on the directionality of the swing, the angle of the head, the speed of the weapon.
Sir, you talked a lot about blood on direct examination. You'd agree with me. It's kind of hard to follow blood, right?
Not necessarily, sir. It's basic physics. You find a blood spatter pattern, and then you use those physics to work backwards to see what the wound looked like.
But, sir, you'd agree there are a lot of things that blood can't tell us. Isn't that true?
I'm not sure exactly what you mean.
For example, time. Blood can't tell us anything about when an individual came in contact with that object, right?
Well, depending on how fresh the blood is, you might be able to gauge relative times, but nothing exact, sir.
In this case, you were not able to gauge anything about time at all, were you?
Not an exact time.
So that blood, it could have gotten on that bat and that mask days earlier,
It could have.
months earlier.
Well, by months, the blood stain probably wouldn't have been as fresh, and we wouldn't have been able to see it as well.
The bottom line is, you have no idea when Skylar Sinclair's blood got on those items, right?
Not precisely.
Another thing blood can't tell us, the circumstances under which blood got on those items. Isn't that true?
Well, that's right. There are certain limitations there.
You certainly can't tell us that blood got on those items when Skylar Sinclair was killing James Robinson, can you?
Well, like I said, we can't determine exactly what the circumstances would have looked like.
Exactly. It could have been a cut that Skylar had a couple days before during practice, right?
A cut probably would have left more of a smear pattern on the bat and less of a circle, but we can't tell exactly.
It could have been a scrape during a softball game.
Well, again, a scrape probably would have had more of a smear pattern and less of an exact circle, but you're right.
And in fact, sir, you actually didn't find any of Skylar Sinclair's blood on the dock, did you?
That's right. The only blood on the dock was a large quantity of blood of Officer Robinson.
Sir, let's talk about some of the things that you didn't test.
All right.
You'd agree with me there's a way to determine whether or not someone touched an object, right?
Well, sometimes you can use fingerprint testing.
Right. But you didn't find any of Skylar Sinclair's fingerprints on that bat, did you?
No, we found a lot of smudged fingerprints, but none of them were usable.
Didn't find any of Skylar Sinclair's hair on that mask, did you?
Not on the mask, no.
Sir, you arrested Skylar Sinclair on March 20th, isn't that true?
I didn't arrest him, sir. I primarily work in the lab.
But you know that Skylar Sinclair was arrested on March 20th.
Yes, I do know that.
You executed a search warrant for her entire apartment, right?
That's right. We were able to search Miss Sinclair's apartment as well as the dumpster that was behind it.
You searched the surrounding area.
We did.
You performed tests on all relevant evidence that you found. Isn't that true?
All that we were able to.
You didn't find any of Skylar's clothes that had blood on them, did you?
No, we didn't.
That trash bag that you said you found in the dumpster, did you find Skylar Sinclair's fingerprints on them?
There weren't any fingerprints on the trash bag.
We've heard today that on the night of the murder, someone texted Officer Robinson. Did you find a phone on Skylar Sinclair's person with messages to Officer Robinson?
I wasn't given any phone, but like I said, I didn't personally arrest her.
Sir, what about the car? Did you even find Skylar Sinclair's car?
No, we weren't able to find the car, sir.
Sir, you didn't even recover the car that was seen at the crime scene, did you?
I don't know what happened to the car.
Weren't able to perform tests on that car?
We weren't able to. I don't know where the car is.
So you don't know who was driving the car that night, do you?
I don't.
And sir, something you said on direct examination that I wrote down, you said you found that ski mask outside Skylar Sinclair's apartment, right?
That's right.
Sir, that apartment, it actually belongs to someone else as well, doesn't it?
I believe that Miss Sinclair shares it with Miss Everett.
Alex Everett also lives in that apartment.
As far as I know.
Alex Everett has access to that apartment.
I would assume so.
Alex Everett, it's outside her apartment that that dumpster is as well, right?
That's right.
And sir, you have no idea whether or not Alex Everett had access to that bat and that mask, do you?
I don't know, sir.
Thank you. Nothing further.
Redirect?
Yes, Your Honor. Detective, Mr. Zhu just asked you several questions about right-handed or left-handed batting. Were you able to determine which way Jamie Robinson was facing at the time of death?
No, ma'am. The blood evidence in this case left us with no indication of the handedness of the individual. Because you can swing a bat with different levels, with different angles of the bat, different speeds, different directions that the head would be facing at the time, there's no way to calculate the blood that was found back to any sort of handedness.
Thank you, sir. No further questions.
Thank you. You may step down.
Thank you, Your Honor.
And may we retrieve that evidence and tender it?
Certainly.
Your Honor, permission at this time to read a portion of a stipulation onto the record?
Could I have the mask?
Of course.
Just a moment. Let her get through her evidence here.
Here's Exhibit 1.
Thank you very much, counsel. All right, sir. Go ahead.
Alex Everett is right-handed. That's all.